场主题演讲，非常荣幸邀请到的是 Edgemoor 研究中心的 Steve Crocker 总裁暨执行长来为我们主讲。It is our great honor to have Dr. Steve Crocker, President and CEO of Edgemoor Research Institute, as our first keynote speaker. Steve Crocker 博士呢是享誉国际的网际网络先驱，还有电脑科学家。他的产官学界的经验非常的丰富，也曾经参与了 ARPANET 初期协定的开发，并且发起 RFC 文件体系。这个一直到目前为止呢，都是记录还有分享网际网络技术标准的重要机制。Dr. Steve Crocker is a renowned internet pioneer and computer scientist with extensive experience across the academia, government, and industry. He was part of the team that developed the original protocols for the ARPANET, and he also initiated the Request for Comments, or RFC series, which continues to serve as a key mechanism for documenting and sharing internet standards today. 今天 Crocker 博士要跟大家分享的主题是在破碎化的网际网路中提升信任。And today, Dr. Steve Crocker is going to speak to us about improving trust across the fractured internet. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Steve Crocker. 我们掌声欢迎 Steve Crocker 博士。
Well, that was a very generous introduction. I will try to give a slightly less exuberant introduction for myself to get things started. It's a real pleasure to be here. I had the opportunity to come once before in October 2007 as part of an ICANN contingent at a regional meeting here, and when the opportunity presented itself that I could come back, I was very quick to say yes. It's a real pleasure, as I said. We've been working with Joe Fan and with Kenny and the TWNIC team on a project which I will mention toward the end of my remarks, but let me start with a slightly different introduction of myself. And the purpose of that is to share with you some background on the perceptions that I want to share with you with respect to the current state of affairs. As a kid, as a child, I was into mathematics, a math geek, if you will. And when computers started to become available, now we're talking about 1960, roughly, I made a beeline to the nearest computers, which were only available on university campuses at the time, and shifted slowly but surely away from studying mathematics purely for its own sake into becoming relatively proficient with programming and using computers for a variety of tasks, including making enough money to put myself through school. It was very helpful. In the process, I stumbled in a way. I was in high school, but I was taking a class at UCLA in psychology. We didn't have psychology as a subject matter in high school, but so it seemed attractive to take it on campus at UCLA. And in a very pedestrian, ordinary freshman level course, one topic after another, the professor mentioned a small thing. You'd have to look it up in the books and dig pretty deeply. The Guthrie model of perception. It was based on 4 axioms. Axioms. I'm the only person in this room, 100 students, all social science majors. They haven't got a clue what an axiom is, but I know what an axiom is. So I raised my hand. I said, could you put these together and make something happen? I'm sure I wasn't even as coherent as what I've just said. No immediate response, but a few weeks later, the professor called me in. He had written a letter on my behalf, and it wound up that I got an introduction with one of the most famous and foundational people in artificial intelligence, Herb Simon, later won a Nobel Prize. And I was turned on from that point on with the idea that computers might help understand human processing, human thinking. The idea that you could get computers to do smart things that would be useful in their own right was also there, but the idea that you maybe could use that as a tool for understanding, for modeling a human thought process. Couldn't do anything with it immediately, but it stayed in my mind. I made my way through school slowly, dropping in and out, spending too much time on computers, as many of my colleagues I learned had also done. And when it came time to choose a graduate school, I went off to study AI under Marvin Minsky. AI is a very, very old idea. The term was invented in, I believe, the middle 1950s by John McCarthy at a conference. And what I later learned was that there was a single office within an agency within the US government that was willing to support, willing to pay for, and seriously push the idea of artificial intelligence. At the time, the number of people, all told, across the United States and even including the rest of the world, who understood what the vision was, who understood what the concept was of artificial intelligence, was relatively small. You could almost know every single person who was involved. And whenever it was explained to other people, the reactions were somewhere between ridicule and disbelief, or just plain not understanding anything. But that office, the Advanced Research Projects Agency within the Department of Defense, had been founded in response to the Russian satellite, Sputnik, and caused a sharp reaction inside the US. How did we lose that race? And the creation of this agency was sort of like a Star Trek mission. Go forth, pick your problem, and go make something happen. And we're not looking for incremental changes. We're looking for large, big changes. Place the big bets. The slogan inside the agency was a factor of 10, not 10%. Well, I was introduced to this incrementally over a few years. First by working in some of the projects that were supported without having any sense of who was paying the bills. And then at a particular moment, I got invited to a meeting of graduate students from each of these projects that were being supported. 30 of us showed up at a meeting, and I was overwhelmed with the insight that somebody had the same ideas that I was developing. I thought, gee, somebody else understands this too. I was pretty young at the time and full of myself. But when I looked around the room and understood the totality of the projects that were being supported and both the breadth and the focus. The focus was, how do you get computers to be as useful as possible? And all of the different ways, from time-sharing systems to interactive systems, which were rare in those days, to graphics, to natural language processing, to other aspects of artificial intelligence. I thought, wow, this is great. And I raised my hand and basically said to the man who was running the meeting, he was only about a year older than I was, I said, when are you leaving? And he understood that I wanted his job, that I could get a front row seat on what was happening. And it came to pass that I actually took his job and got to run those meetings for a few years. A very interesting experience. Part of the broad vision in those days was the idea of connecting computers together and having a general utility, if you will, where you could access all information. Again, a very, very bold and far-reaching vision that was unattainable at the time, but it was still part of the vision. And then only a few years later, the idea of connecting computers together became a reality with the creation of the ARPANET. And one of those accidents of time and place, I found myself part of the team at UCLA, which was the first node on the ARPANET, and got to participate in figuring out, so what are these computers going to say? Packet switching, yes, that's a fantastic idea, much more efficient than circuit switching. But at the end of, when you do all of that, what are these computers going to say to each other? And we found ourselves a set of graduate students because the groups that we were in were led by professors who had their own research agendas. And this idea of being connected to the network was kind of an intrusion in a way, a kind of a side task that was sort of foisted upon them. So they passed it down to the available cheap labor, and we got together and started to chat. First thing we decided was that we should get to know each other, as Zhao mentioned, and we knew at that instant that the whole idea was this was supposed to make it possible to collaborate at a distance without traveling, but the first thing that happened was our travel budgets had to be increased so that we could support getting together with each other. There was no top-down structure to the part of the problem that we worked on. It was organic, and the senior people who were in charge of the budgets were watching, but they didn't come and say, this is what we want you to do. They simply provided enough space so that as long as we were making progress, they had a pretty clear idea that they weren't going to do any better by themselves and that it was great to let us have them. So out of that emerged the bottoms-up process of protocol design, the RFCs, which I intended should be like 6 months, just a few notes that we would write and be replaced by something formal. But that didn't happen. And when we had 100 notes, I was surprised. And when I was invited to write a summary for the 1,000 notes, I thought, well, how are we going to stop this? And the answer is, we're not. In the process, I got to spend a few years working at ARPA. It got renamed DARPA. Didn't cause any change, just a bureaucratic shift in where the agency fit on the overall org chart. And as I mentioned, I got to run those graduate student meetings for a while. I was invited to join that office because of the work that I had done in helping bring the ARPANET protocols into existence. But I was interested not so much in that, but I was interested in the AI portfolio. And so there was a period of time where I was the program manager in charge of the United States artificial intelligence funding for almost everything. There was a little bit of money over in the health department, over in the National Institute of Health, but primarily, and the budget was interestingly large enough to make a difference and small enough to not be noticed most of the time. Roughly $6 million a year when the cost of a fully loaded cost of a man-year was on the order of $50,000. So you can do the math. So some dozens of people working in AI, and that was it for the country. And as I mentioned, an awful lot of reactions whenever we'd explain this to people is one of my colleagues, a good friend, used to sneer, AI, technology of the future, always was, always will be. Except he's wrong. He's also passed away, so he doesn't have to live with his error, in a sense. Everything that's happening now is stuff that we thought about and said, you know, this is where we're trying to go, and it's sort of only a question of time. Some of that time benefited from the improvements in technology and in hardware. Moore's Law played a very, very key role in making computing available. A factor of 10 every 5 years is astounding. Nothing in all of human nature, human experience has ever changed at that rate. But as important as that is, it's not all by itself sufficient. There was serious hard research at trying to understand and exploit the capabilities of the computing processes. We had a speech understanding program that tried to push the barrier from one word at a time, which was the technology of the day, to connected speech, but under extremely favorable circumstances, a quiet environment, a male voice because the register is lower, in a constrained task and a constrained vocabulary. Now you just talk to it, and if we try to explain to a youngster, particularly a very small child, that this was once hard, they look at you funny and say, well, why is it hard? You just talk to it and it understands, and here we are. Let me shift now to some of the things that emerged out of this from a larger perspective. One of the short essays that I found extremely influential when I was younger was written by a naturalist in the early 1920s named J.B.S. Haldane, and he wrote on being the right size. And it was all about scaling, all about what happens when you take a system and you make it bigger or you make it smaller. He was principally focused on animals, on living organisms, and pointed out things like when you take a small organism and you scale it up by a large factor, the requirement for oxygen goes up with the volume, but the ability to take in oxygen is proportional only to the surface area, and that leads to a requirement to change the scope of the shape of the organism quite a bit. So we have very complicated lungs in order to provide the surface area to serve the internal needs. That's just one of many, 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 many examples of how scaling changes things. And how is it relevant here? So we started the ARPANET, we had 4 nodes, and then we had 19 nodes, and we had hundreds of people. And now we have billions of people, we have millions of nodes, and one doesn't have to look too deeply to know absolutely that in that process of scaling up, rather dramatic changes take place. Well, we live it, we know it, you feel it, but having a perspective on it is, I think, helpful. So on the positive side, every aspect of our life is involved in the internet, and the internet is reflective of all aspects of our life. The distinction between the technology and humanity and civilization is getting blurrier all the time. So it's one thing for us to be very narrow in our definition of the internet and say it's a packet switching system and it's global and we allocate addresses and we have routing algorithms and we worry about resilience and we worry about efficiency and cost. All true, but for the vast majority of people actually experience the internet, they experience it through the applications, through the services, and through the connections that it provides. So it's research, it's changed dramatically the research environment, which is where I grew up, but that's just one little layer. It's changed entertainment, it's changed relationships, it's changed commerce, it's changed governance and governments, and of course, it has changed in very strange and awkward ways misbehavior. We have misbehaviors of every sort, from spam to harassment to ransomware to many other kinds of things. And as we've lived inside of the creation of this technology, we've been, in a way, overwhelmed by the set of changes, and then we struggle with how are we going to cope with all that. Part of my journey has involved spending some time at ICANN when 9/11 happened. The organization decided that they needed a security and stability advisory committee. I was asked to set that up and get going, and it drew me into the ICANN process. And what was supposed to be a short-term engagement turned out to be closer to 20 years, almost 20 years all told, and led to my getting on the board and being chairman of the board. And I watched the struggle of that organization dealing with some of these problems. One of the problems that, And just to quickly jump in, because I've gotten a sign that I need to, same sign my wife gives me all the time, it's time to shut up pretty soon. In struggling with all of the different problems, one of the incidental problems has been what to do with who is in the DNS registration data. The story of who is a story almost of a lost child. The creation of the original directories on the network were incidental to but supportive of the rest of the operation of the network. And over time, the nice, clean organization that was started out in the ARPANET days became completely dissociated with its original precepts in the age of the internet and the domain name system and the World Wide Web and so forth. And so if you ask who's behind a particular domain name registration, a couple of bad things have happened. One is the information that you're given is only partially related to the information that the registrars and registries actually have. There's a kind of dissociation between the roles that are made public and the roles that are kept private. Worse yet, the information is very often wrong. It's very often wrong because over time, that information was so heavily abused that people just avoided giving the real information, or they would hide it or whatever. I mentioned that I spent some time at ICANN on the board and eventually as chair for several years. And it annoyed the hell out of me, frankly, that we had been unable to make any serious progress on this problem. We're supposed to be the coordinator across the world. So I took several actions while I was chair, and I took additional, and then when I left, I had reached a point in my life where I did not have a next agenda. My kids were well off. My wife was still with me. We were in good shape. And as I said, I didn't have another agenda. But I decided that I wanted to focus on this very small, almost trivial problem of how do you organize the who is. So here's the messages that come out of that. We've started a project. And the project started by looking at the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are this. You clearly have to balance between privacy and legitimate uses, no question about that. You also have to have a very clean separation between mechanism and policy. That is one of the fundamental lessons that we've learned all throughout the thing about the internet. And that one size isn't going to fit everybody. There are differences in jurisdictions, there are differences in cultures, there are differences in categories of who you want to protect. Businesses you might want to protect one way, individuals differently. And in order to design a system that is going to be effective and efficient and usable, you have to have all of the capability to accommodate those differences and to do it in a fashion that still works smoothly. That is the genius of how the internet was put together, a network of networks with no centralized control, and that is a lesson that we are trying to extract and apply in the sort of rejuvenation and rethinking of the Who Is system. We started a project called Project Jake, named after Jake Feinler, the woman who was originally in charge of the ARPANET directory stuff. She's now 95 years old. She's not in great physical shape, but still sharp as a tack. I had the privilege of having lunch with her in California last week. We are now engaged in a pilot project with TWNIC, with Joe Fan, with Kenny, with an amazingly excellent team. And I'm looking forward to how those things will go. Look for additional words on that. There's a slide. I know I'm over time, but here's the key elements. Look quickly. And here's the interactions among the stakeholders. The full version of this talk is available and will be available over and over again as we make our way through. This is just the teaser, the headlines, as it were. So with that, thank you again for the invitation. As I said, it's a real pleasure. And look forward to spending time with all of you during the week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Dr. Crocker, for your inspiring keynote. Please return to your seats, and thank you for sharing with us your personal stories and your insights. Thank you. 我们非常感谢 Steve Crocker 博士跟我们分享他个人的故事，还有他精辟的见解。再次掌声，谢谢我们的 Steve Crocker 博士。